Joining us now to analyze today's headlines is Courtney Morris. She's an assistant professor of African American and Women's Studies at Penn State University. Hi, Courtney.
Hi, Sonali.
A day after Saudi Arabia had announced that it would suspend airstrikes on Yemen, it resumed bombing the war-torn and impoverished nation that has been taken over by Houthi Shia rebels. This morning, bombs pounded the city of Taiz in the southwestern part of Yemen. The strikes came at the same time as a battle raged on the ground between Houthis and forces loyal to Yemeni President Abdul Rabu Mansour Hadi, who's fled to Saudi Arabia. A local source told the New York Times that, quote, there are many deaths on both sides as a result of this morning's bombing campaign. The Saudis are receiving close logistical support and intelligence from the U.S. Earlier in the week, bombs killed 25 civilians and injured hundreds in the capital, Sana'a. Elsewhere in the Arab world, another war rages on in Syria. Responding to the mass deaths of refugees in the Mediterranean Sea, the UN Special Rapporteur on the human rights of migrants told The Guardian today that rich countries need to take in 1 million Syrian refugees in order to stave off more deaths. Well, Courtney, aren't the US and Saudi Arabia creating yet another horrific situation in Yemen that will only add to the exodus of refugees from the entire region desperate to leave their homes?
Absolutely. I believe that is the case. I mean, when we look at Syria, the refugee situation there has been horrifying. Since the war broke out there in 2011, more than 6.5 million people have been displaced internally in Syria. That's more than half of the civilian population. And 3 million people have fled the country. And the United States, I mean, when people applied for asylum in the United States in 2013, the United States only approved 36 applications for people who were fleeing the war in Syria. And so, I think in the rush to intervene militarily in the region, we've realized that the United States really has failed to meaningfully address the fact that war produces refugees. And when people find themselves living in a war zone where conditions are untenable, they will go wherever they think their chances for survival are strongest. So taking in 1 million refugees from Syria, from other parts of the Middle East and Africa who've been displaced by our policy and economic policy, I think is the least we can do.
The U.S. House of Representatives is expected this morning to pass a bill strengthening cybersecurity, citing the recent breaches at Sony Pictures Entertainment, retail giant Target, and health insurer Anthem. The GOP-dominated House will vote on a cybersecurity bill championed by President Obama and similar to one passed by the Senate Intelligence Committee. Among the provisions in the bill are requirements that private companies give federal investigators access to their computer networks, but concerns about passing on personal information remain. Meanwhile, representatives are also battling over details of the USA Freedom Act, a bill intended to curb some of the worst excesses of the USA Patriot Act that's been used to justify mass surveillance by the NSA. Representative Mike Rogers of the House Intelligence Committee told The Guardian that he was reluctant to curtail surveillance because of the threat posed by the Islamic State to the U.S. Section 215 of the Patriot Act pertaining to NSA surveillance expires on June 1st. Well, Courtney, has the public outcry over mass surveillance seemed to influence Congress at all?
Not as much as one would hope, unfortunately. I mean, I think that the myth that mass surveillance thwarts terrorism and strengthens U.S. national security really continues to hold a lot of traction. Politicians don't want to appear to be weak on national security issues, so they've supported this, even though reports from the NSA, from the CIA, from the Obama administration, and then more recent work by investigative journalists like Glenn Greenwald and think tanks like the New America Foundation all suggest that, in fact, mass surveillance does relatively little to deal with the challenges of terrorist attacks. And so I think fear politics have really driven the debate here. The Obama administration since last year has said repeatedly that an attack on U.S. soil from ISIS is highly unlikely. But these tactics continue to be really effective, and politicians from both sides of the aisle really use them to justify the ongoing erosion of our civil liberties.
And finally, today is the 45th annual Earth Day. Celebrations are taking place all over the world. President Obama is making an appearance at the Everglades National Park in Florida to mark it. Everglades is showing tangible symptoms of climate change because rising concentrations of salt water from a warming climate have impacted wild grass growth and local flora and fauna. Republican presidential candidate and climate denier Florida Governor Rick Scott took the president's visit personally, releasing a statement yesterday criticizing the president for failing to fulfill the Everglades funding needs. Meanwhile, a group of scientists and economists with the Earth League released a joint statement today laying out 8 important issues that need to be addressed at the next UN climate conference in Paris later this year. The letter is available at earthstatement.org. Courtney, do you have an opinion on Earth Day? Shouldn't every day be Earth Day?
I have an opinion on everything, Sonali. I mean, I'm not opposed to Earth Day. I mean, I think it's a symbolic gesture that is positive in that it provides a space for society to reflect on these critical questions regarding the future of the planet. But, you know, the stakes are so high, it seems almost ridiculous to celebrate a single day when these are really life and death issues. Just very recently, I watched the Island President documentary, which follows former President Mohammed Nasheed of the Maldives and his efforts to get the international community to acknowledge the ecological crisis facing his country. The Maldives is literally disappearing as a result of rising sea levels caused by man-made climate change. And this, for me, I think is the point that, you know, the economic inequalities in this world are such that some of us have the luxury of thinking about the planet once or twice a year so we can feel good about ourselves, while there are lots of other people who are literally losing their lands and their livelihoods. And so we need more than a holiday. We need real worldwide coordinated effort to deal with the crisis of climate change.
Courtney Morris, we love having your opinions on our program. Thanks so much for joining us.
Bye, Sonali.
Courtney Morris is an assistant professor of African American and Women's Studies at Penn State University. We'll be right back.